your local news source. This is All Indiana Politics.
Good morning and welcome to All Indiana Politics. I'm Garrett Bergquist in for Phil Sanchez. The fight over property taxes at the State House is entering the home stretch. The House approved the latest version of a property tax overhaul at the end of the week and returned it to the Senate. Homeowners would get a 10% tax credit on their total property tax bill, up to a maximum of $300. Local income tax rates could not exceed 2.9%, down from 3.75% right now. Larger cities could now raise some of their local income tax rates as long as the total combined rate did not exceed 2.9%. It also exempts business personal property up to $1 million from taxation.
First of all, the rate is going to drop. Right now, the max local income tax is 3.75. After Senate Bill 1, the max will be 2.9%, and so they'll be able to help themselves a little bit in that way, but it won't even come close to filling all the property tax. And so overall, for local citizens, it is a tax savings without a doubt.
Do you plan to concur on Senate Bill 1 or send it to conference?
So I think we're talking about it as a caucus. We've been looking at it very closely. Our caucus members have, looking at some runs and making sure they understand how it affects their local communities. And so we'll continue to talk about that over the weekend. But it is our strong hope that we'll be able to concur on that Senate Bill number 1.
Raising those local income taxes will be necessary. I mean, you can ask any legislator at this point who they're hearing from, and we are hearing resolutions being passed, desperate phone calls from our community leaders, from our firefighters to our mayors to our township trustees who are desperate that we address this in Senate Bill 1. And so homeowners, while they're in the current Senate Bill 1, we'll see a minor reduction. They're not even going to see much help, a relief. They're going to see their local income taxes raised.
This is now the fourth version of the property tax plan lawmakers have considered. It could cost about $1.4 billion over the next 3 years. Most local government units would lose money. State budget analysts say some could lose tens of millions of dollars over the next 3 years. Hamilton County officials told me they likely would raise their local income tax rate to offset any property tax revenue losses.
I know the perception at the State House is that Hamilton County has all the money. What do they need with money? Maybe with some people. But, I just think we manage our money well, and we provide good services for our citizens, and they expect it, and we're going to provide it. And if those tax dollars are cut, then we'll have to make that up somewhere. When you have a growth county like Hamilton, you can't cut back on services. You have to keep being progressive. So that's really not an option. Yes, we've looked at it, but there's not a lot of places we can cut. And we have so many major things going on right now, like our new 911 center, a new women's center, a new police and fire safety training center.
A former mayor and expert on local governance says most local governments don't have any fat to trim from their budgets. Former Fort Wayne Mayor Paul Helmke tells me it's very likely counties will raise local income tax rates across the state to offset any lost revenue. And joining us now is Paul Helmke. He's the director of the Civic Leaders Center at the IU O'Neill School of Public and Environmental Affairs. He's also a former mayor of Fort Wayne. Paul, thank you for joining us.
It's good to be here.
So how critical is property tax revenue for local governments, and especially school corporations?
It's property taxes has been and still is the main revenue source for all local government. It's interesting. When I looked at the fiscal statement for this SB 1, the impact on state government is almost nil, because state government does not rely on property taxes. It's our local cities and counties and schools that rely on property tax.
In practice, how much excess does the average local government in Indiana have? How much wiggle room is there?
there's not much room at all on property taxes. I've been involved with local government for most of my life. Seems like every 20 or 25 years, state government tries to step in and do something with property taxes. Back in the Bowen era, they had some caps, and then they allowed local government to do income taxes. Back in the Mitch Daniels era, they put constitutional caps, and but then they had lottery money coming in. Now we're trying it again. It's every 20, 25 years, state government steps in, tries to do something controlling local tax revenues. And because of that, local units are basically at their maximum. They've done everything they can to get the revenue they need to take care of our schools, to pay for our firefighters and police officers. So there's not a lot of wiggle room.
Did you ever deal with anything equivalent to what we're seeing right now in terms of changes to the property tax system when you were mayor of Fort Wayne? When I was mayor, 1988 till 2000, things were fairly stable at the state level, but we were basically we put in a local income tax for the first time. But that was part of the time period when local governments realized that in order to get things done that we needed to get done, you needed the local income tax revenue. We did a tax reform package somewhat similar to what the state's doing now. We reduced property taxes for homeowners, particularly put in the local income tax. But whether you were a winner or a loser on that, depending on what your income was and what your house values were. So it sounds good to say that you're doing things, but for the average taxpayer, when you look at all of the taxes you pay, it might not make that much difference, or you might end up spending more than you would have if they hadn't done the reform. That leads me into my next question. Does this guarantee that local governments will raise their local income tax rates, as Democrats claim they will?
I think it's almost going to force local governments to raise local income taxes. When you say that you can't have any flexibility on property taxes, then local governments still have to pay for the essential services. And to pay for those essential services, they need money. And to get that money, they're going to have to do the local income tax. I always told people when I was mayor, this is easy. If you want more of something, you've got to pay more for that something. And at the local level, people generally want more, public safety, better roads, better streets, and they've got to pay for that.
What really drove the increase in property taxes? Was it assessed valuation? Was it inflation? Or was it something else?
I think it's a combination of inflation and assessed valuation. I looked at my property tax bill. My property tax bill for this year is going up 15%. And I encourage everyone, look at your bill and try to figure out how this impacts you. I think a lot of people, I remember when I was mayor, I told somebody, I've reduced your property taxes. And they said, well, no, you haven't. And I said, look at your tax bill. And they said, I don't see my tax bill. I pay it through the bank. And then I said, well, then how do you know your property taxes are going up? And it says, I read the newspaper headlines. Look at your individual property tax bill, see what's happening. Mine's going up 15%. But the rate I'm being charged is actually decreased. So that means I'm paying more because my assessed valuation is more. My assessed valuation is more because of inflation and real estate prices going up. So you've got a combination of all these things. And it's something you could argue that, well, I'm wealthier now. My house is worth more. But again, the catch is that doesn't give me any more money in my pocket. So that's why there's the push for property tax reform. When you've got, when you're locked into when your values go up, that doesn't give you more money to spend. So it's harder to pay those property taxes. But if you're balancing it out by raising the income taxes, again, there's not necessarily a net benefit, and there could easily be a net loss for a lot of people.
At the end of the day, how much of a difference is this going to make for homeowners?
It's it's going to depend on the individual situation. I think for most homeowners, it's probably going to be a wash, because if you own a home, you could see a $300 property tax reduction. But I think maybe not next year, but within the next 2 years, you're going to see an income tax hike that's more than that. And I know the legislators and the governor are talking about, oh, gee, we're putting this cap on what the local income taxes can be. I looked at the county by county property tax rates. I think there's only one or two counties that are presently at the 2.9% cap. So that means that every other county has plenty of room to raise the income tax another 1%, and that's going to end up costing people.
Paul Helmke, thank you for joining us.
Good to talk to you.
Coming up, we take a look at how the ongoing tariff fight is affecting consumers right here in Indiana. Welcome back. President Donald Trump has put a 90-day pause on so-called reciprocal tariffs. The U.S. will maintain a 10% baseline tariff for nearly all imports. That's much lower than the White House originally planned to implement. But the tariff on Chinese goods is now up to 145%. Our Tim Spears has been digging into the impact of these tariffs on the Hoosier State.
Experts say the first place we'll see price increases is groceries, specifically perishable groceries, because inventory needs to be replenished. The immediate concern for many, though, is the uncertainty this creates. Ready to shop at Whole Foods, Karina Medrano said she's not the only one cutting back.
I used to have more business.
She runs a cleaning service where customers have reduced orders because they're expecting prices to rise. Your business is already being directly affected because you're seeing people want to start saving their money.
Yes.
The real challenge is the uncertainty that this brings.
Michael Hicks leads the Center for Business and Economic Research at Ball State University. He says even these decreased tariffs will raise prices.
Some of it's going to be so small that we won't notice it. Others will be more substantial.
But the bigger fear for Hicks, unemployment rising.
The tariffs that were in place this morning would have pushed us into a recession immediately. I still think we're at extraordinary risk, over a 50-50 chance of a recession in second quarter of this year.
According to the Indiana Manufacturing Association, 28% of the state's GDP and 17% of the state's workforce comes from manufacturing. The association CEO told me companies don't know how to plan around the president's trade policy because it's so quick to change.
The challenge is going to be some small number of Americans are going to lose their jobs entirely. So we're going to just see a higher unemployment rate, slower economic growth, and higher prices.
Now, Hicks believes price increases from this round of tariffs could possibly hit consumers by summer. A big one, buying a car, even owning a car, because insurance and repairs are expected to cost more because the cost to replace those vehicles will increase.
Coming up, Indiana's best political team takes on the property tax fight at the State House and the tariff fight around the world. Welcome back to All Indiana Politics as we welcome in two members of Indiana's best political team, Democrat Kip Tu and Republican Tom John. Gentlemen, welcome back to the show.
Good to be here.
Let's begin with the latest on the property tax proposal. Tom, we just heard local governments are all but certain to raise local income tax rates if this thing becomes law. Does this proposal really do anything for homeowners?
Well, I mean, you saw the governor throughout the campaign and then coming in this session. As a part of his freedom and opportunity agenda, he wanted to see cuts, caps, and reforms. This bill does that. Now, anytime you do anything like this, you're going to have winners and losers. And certainly there's going to be some resetting of the table with local governments, but at least from the governor's perspective, he heard a lot of taxpayers that really were hurting with where property taxes were going, and I think that you see that result coming out of the session.
Kip, will counties be able to make up the difference without raising local income tax rates to the point where they totally wipe out any savings homeowners get from this?
Very doubtful. I think that you're going to see a tax shift. I think Democrats spoke about that on the floor Thursday afternoon, that you're really not lowering taxes. You're shifting them from property taxes to income taxes. And, my view of it is, I think, in line with what Michael Hicks said, the Ball State conservative economist, who said this is a regressive move. And so Republicans spent the last couple of campaigns trying to appeal to the working class. This bill hurts the working class because the taxes are going to be more centered on them than they are the upper class, because our income tax rate is a flat percentage, and so everybody gets hit the same, and so it's a regressive tax.
Staying on that, did the governor kind of sort of paint himself into a corner on this?
Well, I mean, he ran on this, and he's going to, declare victory with this, that there's been some property tax reform. $300 for some people means something, but for a lot of people, it's not that big a deal.
Tom, I'll let you respond as well. Now, Braun's most recent statement indicated that he would sign this proposal if it stays in its current form and gets concurred by the Senate. Has he lost any political capital on this? Because his supporters were adamant that they wanted a reset back to 2021 rates.
Well, politics are the possible. And as we've talked about this over several episodes, the fact is that you have to get to a place that you can get to. And the governor has done something that is real and substantive, both in the immediate cuts, but more importantly, in the long-term look at growth and transparency. And it's interesting to hear Kip talk about regressive. In fact, where you live is a bigger part of the income and the spending of people who are at the lower income level than it is the higher income level. So it's kind of, the limousine liberal comes in and says, that's nothing, $300. $300 is a lot for a lot of people, and particularly when you're talking about where they're living, whether it's their house or whether it's a rental.
But the income tax is going to come take it away from them, so.
Yeah. Well, speaking of taxes, let's also turn to tariffs. President Donald Trump has paused his tariffs on nearly all of the countries he threatened to tariff, but China, we still have the tariffs going into place there. So, Tom, with most of those countries resetting their tariff rates ostensibly to zero, does this mean that President Trump's tariff proposals worked as intended?
Well, I think you are seeing this. And the president in the joint address said, we have an issue and it's not going to be easy to work through it. And you've seen the beginning of this, and you are seeing a lot of pictures of foreign diplomats and foreign leaders meeting with the president, meeting with the Secretary of State, others, Secretary of Commerce, to work out tariffs. And if you look at the history of tariffs, they needed to be reset. As far as China, that's a different issue, and that's why it's being treated differently. But all in all, I think it is moving forward. Has it been the most direct route? Maybe not, but anytime you have a big change and you're trying to address big issues, oftentimes there's pain involved.
That was about as good a spin as I think a Republican could make on this disaster that we've been through the last couple of weeks. I've said, is Liberation Day like Infrastructure Week? They're on, they're off, they're on, they're off. We were 24 hours away from a financial meltdown. The bond markets told the president what to do because they were about to send us into a depression. And he backed off. I'm glad he backed off because we were going to have a complete financial meltdown. We don't know what he's going to do next week because he's so ridiculous.
And Kip, with the tariff on China still being at 145%, China's a major agricultural market for Indiana farmers. How do you see that specifically affecting
It hurts them. I mean, it hurts everybody's pocketbook in the United States when they're trying to go to the grocery store. I mean, you guys said it at the beginning of the show. Grocery prices are going to go up first. This president is the least informed on economics of any president in my lifetime, and he is out there just freewheeling it and causing great harm because from one day to the next, you don't know what he's going to do because he's not a rational, sane human.
Tom, I'll let you respond to that, but also I want to point out that the stock market took an absolute beating over the past week. Is the result of these tariffs, is that worth what we saw in the financial markets?
Well, the stock market's not the economy. And it's a short term. If we remember, the stock market at the beginning of COVID crashed. Within a few months, it was at new highs. And it is reflexive, but not necessarily indicative. And I think in this case, you knew that there were going to be people coming back, having concerns. But the fact of the matter is, let's see how this plays out in a few months and in a few years as we work through. And do we end up with a better situation where we have more manufacturing in the United States and where we end up with a better trade balance vis-a-vis the rest of the world?
Well, trade balance is what the president, I think, is too focused on. He ought to be focused on what the bond markets are doing, and the bond markets still are telling him back off. I mean, you've got China that you spoke about, and it's a big problem.
Kip, we're going to have to leave it there. We're running out of time. Great discussion as always. Thank you both for coming in.
Sure. Thanks.
Thank you for joining us for All Indiana Politics. We'll be back here next Sunday morning at 9:30, and be sure to check out the All Indiana Politics podcast online at wishtv.com. Have a great rest of your weekend.
Wish TV. This is All Indiana Politics Podcast on the All Indiana Podcast Network. Watch All Indiana Politics live Sunday mornings at 9:30 on Wish TV and at wishtv.com. Subscribe to this podcast and listen weekly here on the All Indiana Podcast Network. And be sure to discover even more great podcasts at allindianapodcastnetwork.com.